Good. Okay, well, let's make a start. So welcome to FAQs Live. My name's Duncan. Looking forward to hearing all of your questions today. Today, we're talking about how you can make processes and tools support individuals and interactions. And I'm joined today by Jurriaan from Targetprocess. Jurriaan, would you like to say a quick hello and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure, Duncan. Hi. My name is Jurriaan Laan. I'm from the Netherlands. I work with Targetprocess, which is a company creating one of the leading tools in agile work management. I've been working there for a little bit over a year now, and before that, I was for many years a full-time agile coach, working for a big consultancy company and working with larger and smaller companies all over Europe, helping them with becoming more agile. And especially see that in bigger companies, it's a bit more of a struggle because they have so much more history and structure, and it's a challenge if you want to make them more agile. And of course, the whole tooling subject also comes in, so that's always a nice point of discussion, and that's also what we're going to discuss today.
Yeah, great stuff. Looking forward to getting stuck into that. So with you, I can imagine it must be a challenge dealing with your sort of clients, and it's all about the tool. If you're sort of representing a tool vendor, how do you actually sort of get back to the real, the sort of good stuff, the agile ways of working, good outcomes for the business, and so on and so forth. So that's the agenda that we've kind of put together today. It's broken down into 3 sections. We're going to start off talking about the sort of headline topic, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. We'll explore a little bit about where that sort of comes from and what it means in relation to the Agile Manifesto. We'll then sort of look at the rest of the manifesto and the principles as well behind them. Don't worry, we're not going to go through every single one, but we'll maybe sort of pick out a few interesting, relevant ones. And then finally, we'll wrap up by just thinking a bit about the roles that tools play in our work, in the way that we sort of process things. In between all of those topics, we'll have a Q&A session. So for those that have joined us today, if any questions come up, best thing to do is to post them in the Q&A, and maybe even while we're talking. So while we're sort of talking about one topic, if a question occurs to you, fire them into the Q&A, and that way, when we get there, we'll be able to dive straight in and answer your questions. Good. I should also say that this session is recorded, so be aware of that in terms of any questions that you ask, and that may be sent out to you after the class. So without further ado, let's dive into the first session. So how can you best apply the manifesto value, individuals and interactions over processes and tools in a modern, distributed and scaled environment? To kick us off, I'm just going to sort of take you through a bit of content from one of our Agile training courses. This is taken from the BCS Foundation Certificate in Agile, which we run for various people. So this is the sort of stage where we're talking about the manifesto, when we're talking about how interactions driven by tools can sometimes go. And this is based on anecdotal experience and countless clients over the years that we've sort of seen. And it goes a little bit like this. So you have some people over on the left, they're raising requests, adding new features, asking for new things to be done. Sometime later, they get frustrated. I raised this ticket 3 weeks ago. Why isn't anything happening? Meanwhile, over on the right, you've got a team that's somewhere else, up on a different sort of part of the world, and they're sort of maybe looking at a different queue, or is that the sort of place that we're expecting things to go? And the problem with this is that we've got it the wrong way around. The tool is at the center of the interaction, and the sort of questions that come up. Well, I raised this ticket and nobody's looked at it, and the blame starts to creep in, and it's just all happening the wrong way around, and it's all sort of driving the wrong behaviors. This isn't the fault of the tool. This is just that the people are going about it in the wrong way. So a better approach would be, let's have a conversation. The formality of the conversation may differ depending on how well you know the people, but having some sort of conversation, some sort of to and fro, whether it's sort of talking about your kids or just sort of saying hello as a human being, and then saying, well, what's this feature that you're looking for? Tell me a bit about it. Great. Now that we've had the conversation, that's the time that the tool can come in. We still need a tool. If we don't have somewhere to write these things down, we're going to forget what we talked about, and we won't be able to track it, and we won't be able to know what's what. We won't be able to see where all the work is. But the emphasis is on the processes and the tools supporting those conversations and those interactions. How do you see this, Jurriaan, for your own sort of clients? Do you have any sort of similar experiences?
Yeah, what you see is that in the first picture, you see actually that the tool is replacing the interaction and not adding to the quality of the interaction. The tool should improve the quality of the interaction, presenting data or making stuff visible in a nice way, so you don't need to start by drawing something, but you can take what's already there. But you see in a lot of times you see that especially when the tool gets introduced too early into the process, the tool replaces the interaction. So sometimes you see, for example, if you're working with Scrum teams and they have a daily stand-up and they come into the room and they wait for the tool to fire up to start the conversation. And if the tool doesn't fire up for whatever reason, there's no conversation happening. While
Yes.
there should always be a conversation with or without the tool, with or without boards or stickies or whatever. Just have a conversation about the work. That's why you're there. It's not, you're not talking to the board. So that is in the best how do you say, transformations or agile coaching sessions. If the tool doesn't come first, it's better. Because
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
then people understand why there is a conversation, what the goal of the conversation is, and then they will ask after a while, hey, can we have a tool? Because that makes our life easier. And it's not talking about whatever is presented by any tool.
That's a nice way of thinking about it, having the tool come second, on a daily basis. You start with the conversations in the sort of daily call, then you look to the tool to capture it. I've noticed a similar pattern even when you're setting up the team. The tool comes first, and whatever tool you're using, it probably has a Scrum template, and that's the starting point for how teams decide to work together in the first place. We must use user stories because our tool has a work item titled story, so therefore that must be the way that we work. So the tool is dictating the behaviors. The tool is describing how teams should work. I often say to people, the better way to do it is, first of all, do it on, well, maybe don't do it on paper now, because obviously that's a bit more difficult than it used to be, but maybe use some sort of freeform tool, like an interactive whiteboard, something that doesn't constrain you in that sort of way. Figure out how you're going to work together, and then once you've got it, then even after a week or so, then you sort of go into the tool and you say, right, how can I get the tool do the job that I want to do, or that we as a team have figured out how to do?
Yes, I completely agree. Also, if you are looking into tools and you're not sure and you're still small, try and start using simple tools. Don't go dive in directly into tools like the big names on the market, including Targetprocess, because they can be overwhelming. And if you don't know exactly what your need is, then maybe your experience will not be as good as you understand what your need is. Maybe start with something simple, just share an Excel file or a Google Docs, or use something simple like a Trello board, which is very low on process. And then when you are starting to hit the limits, then you understand why there are other tools and what benefits they bring, and you start getting their value. And that is usually the best way to really get the benefits of having the 8x tool.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like this idea of tools first, I think, or no, not tools first, people first, interactions first. That's a nice way of putting it. This section is, I guess we've talked about the daily interactions, and then we've talked about the sort of process, setting up the process in the first place. One of the other topics that this section is about is scale, and I guess that's when it becomes even more challenging. If you have 100 people and they're trying to figure out how to work together, there's an even greater danger that the tool, and I would include processes in that as well, something like a scaled framework or something like that is likely to draw you into a predetermined way of working. Whereas actually the thing to do is to figure out how you're going to work as a group, and then again try to sort of figure out the most appropriate tools and the most I guess the simplest ways of getting started.
Yes, correct. Yeah, you see that of course, if you're working in a big organization, everybody uses their own tools, it can get messy. And maybe some little structure by standardizing on some common tools to provide transparency, because that is what a tool really can help you with. Provide transparency and not having to walk with paper notes between rooms. And in the digital world, it's even more difficult. That is really the added benefit, to make stuff that is invisible. And in our IT world, a lot of stuff is invisible because it's hidden in screen, in some database or Word documents, to make that visible and to help the conversation around the things that you need to talk about, and not just the everyday things.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
tooling can help by visualizing dependencies between teams. Say, hey, there is a dependency. Let's, in a meeting where we have every week, we talk about dependencies. Let's make sure that we talk about the dependencies which are actual or which are in danger, or whatever rules you have. So to get a more focused discussion, that is what tools can help you with in a large organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I like what you said there about transparency and just being able to see what's going on. As you say, we've had a few clients where they've got maybe 3 or 4 different tools on the go at the same time. The developers using one thing, the product people are using another thing, and there's another, the integration specialists are doing something different, and you got 3 or 4 or 5 different tools and databases and sort of wiki pages all over the place. If you can't look in one place and say, okay, there's the picture, there's where things are, it's a real challenge. And the bigger you get, the more complex it becomes, and the greater the need for simplicity. Just having an easy place to look at so that you can say, yes, there's the picture. We can see what's going on.
Correct. If you take it from a real agile mindset, agile values perspective, then you should say, okay, everybody's free to choose whatever tool they like, because that is being self-managed. And from an agile coach, I fully agree to that. Just this way of working doesn't scale very much. If you're working with 50 teams together and everybody uses the same, who is going to have the oversight? I mean, you see in most organizations, the organization is not ready to do what would actually be necessary, is to descale the organization instead of upscale your way of working. So they're not there. So they upscale their way of working, and then having some kind of standards for simplicity will help a lot. That at least everybody's talking the same language. Everybody can see the common things on some common views or boards or some shared tools, and that just makes life easier. And that is why we need tools, because we want to make our lives easier. It's not to replace the actual work that we're doing. Like a craftsman, like a carpenter, he doesn't use a saw because he doesn't know how to split the wood, but it just goes so much easier if you use a saw.
It's going to be a lot faster.
Yes. That's the whole thing also with Agile tools. They should make life easier, and it should not be a goal or a burden.
Yeah, absolutely. Good, interesting stuff. Well, that's a good sort of opening to the conversation. Why don't we see if anybody's got any questions on anything we've come up? So this sort of first topic is all about individual interactions, processes, and tools, how they fit together, and especially how to achieve this in a modern, distributed, and scaled environment. So let's turn it over to the Q&A now. We're joined by Jess from our events team here at Agility in Mind. Jess, are there any questions that we can look at yet?
Yeah, we have one come in the chat. It asks, is there a danger that being too informal means that the right work doesn't always get done and people just help out the people they get on the most with?
Interesting. Yeah, so I guess the sort of conversation on the screen here is kind of creating an image of sort of best friends having a bit of a chat together, and yes, no problem, I'll do your bit, and maybe not paying too much attention to some other work that somebody more distant might be sort of getting on with. Yeah, interesting. What are your thoughts on that, Jurriaan?
Yes, we see that, and my advice would always be, don't discuss the steps or work on the steps that you need to do to go there, but talk about where you want to go and how to get there, because maybe your journey, the steps that you have thought of, they will change. So be focused as a group on whatever you want to achieve and talk about that. So if you have a laser like focus on where you want to go, then everybody makes sure that they work on what is necessary and don't get distracted by little things, because eventually you're going to be valued on whether you reached your goal in some way or another, and not whether you did the exact work that you had planned.
Yeah, absolutely. It is always easy to be distracted by those little things. I think one thing I've noticed sometimes there is that there's maybe a bit of a confusion between agility, flexibility, focusing on people, interactions, collaboration. People sometimes conflate that with perhaps a lack of rigor or a lack of discipline. Um, and actually, I think it certainly happens. I've certainly seen many cases where somebody says, let's be agile about this, and then proceeds to do something completely irrelevant and distracting. But actually, I think the intent of agile is, let's make conscious decisions within a clear framework and clear accountabilities. If you're somebody like a product owner who's organizing a backlog and is deciding, do we do this first or this first? I think the way that I've seen that go well in the past is that those decisions are made in the open and with clear, sort of guidelines, clear sort of decision-making processes. The goal for this sprint is this, or the vision for the next quarter is this. That's the focus. For that reason, this is what we're going to do, and that's why we're not going to do this one, but this one takes priority. I think getting a bit of rigor into an agile process sometimes isn't a bad thing.
Yeah, people work better if they work from a plan. I mean, that's why we do. If you do Scrum and you do sprints, you have a sprint plan. It's not that you will stick to the plan no matter what, but it's to have a clear look ahead. Okay, what's most likely to be coming along if nothing changes, and if something changes, we should be able to adjust the plan and not saying no, but the plan was we do this. No, something has changed, so we should adjust the plan in order to reach the goal. But working from a plan is always better than just working out of the tree. That's also why he says having a plan is nothing bad, but sticking to it, that's maybe bad.
Well, exactly. Yeah, the Agile Manifesto doesn't say you don't have a plan. It just says, you got to be able to respond to change. I guess responding to change means you had a plan in the first place, doesn't it?
Yeah,
if you didn't have a plan, you're just making it up as you go along.
Yeah, if there is no plan, there's no change.
Good. Any other questions, Jess, before we move on?
Yeah, we have one more. They say they have about 500 items in their backlog, but do they have to have a discussion with someone about every single item?
Yeah.
What do you think about that one, Jurriaan?
Yeah, it's a good question. First of all, having 500 items in the backlog, no matter the size, sounds a bit much. Probably depends on what kind of backlog it is. Maybe it's a backlog for a large product, and it could be okay-ish if it's small items. But yeah, usually I would say try to limit your backlog, because a backlog should be a list of things that you think you're able to do within some defined timeline. It's no use to put something in the backlog if you're not going to do it within a year or so. That's basically just fooling your stakeholders, saying yes, I will take it into my to-do list, and no, I will never have time for doing it. So keep your backlog small. And then, of course, typical backlog management, stuff that is not so urgent or not so valuable. It can be still very rough. You don't even know how big it is. You just put it there and have some initial thoughts on it. And stuff that comes more close by to starting implementation, there you will have your just-in-time discussions. Okay, what is exactly the current needs? Has something changed since the item was described or put on the backlog? And then you start to have the real discussions about to get clarified even more. But those discussions, they don't stop if you're doing Scrum at sprint planning. The discussions will continue during the sprint, because even a backlog item, it's not a fixed set of agreements. They are quite fixed because you can go crazy on them, but all the details, the dots and the commas, they're not filled in. That's the whole conversational part that still needs to take place within the team or squad that's working on it.
Yeah, absolutely. It does sound a bit out of control having 500 items, but again, this is not an uncommon situation. One tip I picked up there that can help is whatever you decide about all of those items, you don't have to do it for everything before you get started for the next sprint or whatever it is that you're doing. So I once had a sort of team where they said, well, we've got all these requirements here. It wasn't even a backlog. It was a big sort of old school set of requirements. And somebody said to me, well, we're going to have to translate all of this into a backlog before we can get started. I said, well, do you really need to do that? Why not just pick out the top 5, top 10 most important things analyze those, then get started. All that other stuff can be there, and maybe you gradually bring it over. I've got to say, I secretly knew that they were going to throw away all of those requirements. It was just a matter of time, but maybe they're there as a bit of a safety net, and maybe that's the way for that sort of big backlog. Pick out the important stuff, get on with that. Secretly, over the course of 6 months, just delete, just get rid of it.
Yeah, you can see a backlog sometimes, like input for like brainstorming. So you have a lot of ideas you show them on a pile. Then you need to start making sense of them, start to group them, and start to order them in some valuable order, saying, hey, this is probably valuable now. But then secondly, you of course also have a logical like delivery order where you say, okay, this might be the highest priority, but this still needs to come first because of some dependency. So, and then you'll get more clarity on the exact steps, but it doesn't mean you need to have everything in detail. Something further along can be just, okay, this is the next big thing, whatever it may be.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Okay. Any other questions coming in, Jess?
That's it for the moment, but if anyone does want to ask any more, they can put it in the Q&A or raise their hand and talk to you guys directly.
Great, good stuff. Let's move on to the next little sort of segment then. So what about the other manifesto values? We talked about individuals and interactions over processes and tools. What about the other elements of the sort of headline manifesto, and even the sort of 12 principles behind the manifesto? Are they still relevant? This was back in 2001 that a bunch of frankly, a bunch of middle-aged white men got together in a ski resort and came up with some great ideas. Is that relevant in 2021 in a completely different world, the distributed environment where the technology has changed so much, the interactions have changed so much? What do you want to open us up on this one, Jurriaan? What do you make of this?
Yeah, sure. I think that having a look at the values of the annual manifesto, they are still super relevant because they're not about technology or anything that's really time bound. Processes and tools and individual interactions are of any time, no matter technology or situation in the world. So if you look a little further later on into the principles, there are some things that you can have a little bit more discussion about how relevant are they. But if you look at the values, I think they are still relevant, knowing that, of course, at that time, they weren't thinking about scaling per se or having agile in big organizations. So you need to have a look at these values if they work for you as is, or if you take them and maybe add on a little stuff for your environment.
Yeah, I think that's a good take on it. I think you're right. I think the sort of headline sort of manifesto values are all pretty relevant. I don't think there's anything here I disagree with. Maybe a small bit of word tuning here and there. Working software, obviously, you could expand that out a bit to just mean working systems or stuff, products, whatever it is that you're producing. Yeah. But certainly, I think probably one of my favorite ones is about the customer collaboration over contract negotiation. I think that really links in with the tooling discussion we were talking about before.
Yeah.
You could say a ticket in a backlog in a tool is a bit like a contract. It probably has acceptance criteria in it, and that interaction could go one of two ways. Either somebody says, well, it says here in bullet point 7 that it was supposed to be like this, or it could go, well, this is what we built. Is it the right thing? Is it going to do what we wanted to do for the customers, for the clients, for us as a sort of team? If so, it's less relevant. Does it meet bullet point 7? It's more relevant. Is it going to do the job? Is it going to sort of be the right thing? Should we change it? Is it important enough that we should go back and not release it now? And that's that sort of collaboration sort of piece, I think, is hugely sort of relevant today. I think there's all sorts of discussions about agile contracts these days, and if you're engaging a vendor, is it time and materials? Is it fixed price? Those conversations are still very, very sort of pertinent to today, and I think absolutely sort of do lead you in the sort of right direction if you're sort of emphasizing those things on the left.
Yeah, I think if you look at this, your example, like if you take a user story or something, the most important thing that should be in there from my perspective is why. Why are we doing this? What need or problem are we trying to solve, and not how we do it. If you look at acceptance criteria, it should describe what needs need to be fixed, what things the stakeholder needs to be able to do, not how to do them. That's something that you might detail on in test scenarios or some designs, and those can change based on whatever you find on some experiments. But the need probably still needs to be fixed, and even those are not set in stone, because maybe the need is quite big, and maybe you can split it up into chunks, and maybe some parts are more important than other parts. So it's not about sticking to indeed whatever you exactly agreed upon, but it's getting the job done.
Yeah, absolutely. Whereas I guess if you sort of look into the sort of 12 principles, I guess there's more of a rework job to do here, both when you're talking about being distributed and when you're talking about being at scale. Obviously, I think there's reference in there somewhere to face-to-face conversations being the most valuable sort of interaction. I think, back in 2001, I could well imagine that that would be the case with the technology they had available at the time, the bandwidth, the available tools. Hopefully the fact that we're here today, and hopefully, if people are finding value out of this, and I think you and I are certainly having a pretty easy, natural conversation, I think that's, you'd probably say it would be your first choice, but it wouldn't be so significant that if you were writing 12 principles now, it wouldn't be top of my list. I might have it maybe sort of item number 50 if I got that far, if possible. If there's a easy way to do it, a face-to-face conversation would be nice, but it seems less important than it used to be.
Yeah, what you see is that with modern technology, the speed of the connection has gone up so much that it's become like real time, like we're talking now, even though we're miles apart. And that is what makes the conversation of good quality. So if you're having an asynchronous conversation over email, that's just bad quality, because you have to type something, you have to wait. Even I couldn't imagine nowadays working without Slack or Microsoft Teams or those kind of like a chat room tools, because you don't always need to see a face or have a voice conversation. A quick chat can do wonders as well. And of course, if there was a coffee machine and we would meet each other, that would be best. But nowadays, that's a bit difficult.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think face-to-face is preferred, but face-to-face is not necessarily just face-to-face in real life.
Well, exactly, yeah. You can do face-to-face at a moment's notice these days. So the rest of the team here at Agility and Mind does sometimes, we remark about the fact that it feels a little bit like being on Star Trek. Load the view screen. If you want to talk to somebody, like within seconds, they're there. They're in your sort of they're in your house. Oh, great. let's have a chat. Yeah. So technology has come in quite a bit.
Yes, it has some benefits, because you can easily share your screen and drag in whatever app or tool or picture you want to discuss about. So it has some benefits as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess one that's been sort of grabbing my interest as we've been chatting is number 11. The best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. I think that becomes a special challenge, first of all, at scale, and also in a distributed environment where maybe without efforts, there is that tendency for people to be left out of conversations and not be involved in conversations. And if you have 100 people, it can be difficult to involve 100 people in that sort of bottom-up knowledge and those architectures and those designs. So I think that's maybe more of a challenge at scale in a distributed sort of setting than it was back when a team of 6 or 7 people were in the same room and they could just go to a whiteboard and talk about stuff.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. If you look at large organizations, there will be probably large solutions being built or large projects being made, and you need to standardize on some big choices that you need to make. And you cannot have every team make their own choices, because then maybe it doesn't work so well together, or it doesn't scale, or it just becomes very expensive. So probably you need to make some big stuff in a more or less centralized way. But the challenge is, of course, get everybody involved, get the ideas from the people who actually have experience, then maybe have some selection or whatever, and then communicate around these choices. So why were they made? When were they made? Who were involved? And so everybody can see the history of those choices. And that is what adds to this transparency in big organizations. And that is, again, where tooling, whatever way, SharePoint or wikis or whatever, they come in handy.
Yeah, I think I've seen a few case studies that show things like social media type tools can help with that sort of thing. If there's a decision to be made that affects 100 people, 1,000 people, if you do completely top-down decision making, it causes fast decision making, but frustration. The people at the bottom feel, this has been imposed upon them, and it works, stuff happens, but it's not ideal. If, on the other hand, you sort of try to do it entirely bottom up and try to get consensus and get everybody to agree, you may as well wait until 3 or 4 years in the future before everybody can say, yes, I think that's probably the best thing to do. So you need some sort of way that people can feed into it, but nonetheless, there is a decision maker. So having, social media type platforms and ways that people can say, well, this is a decision that needs to be made. I'm going to make this decision next week. I'm looking for advice. Can you sort of give me some tips, or can you sort of, if anybody sort of has some input to sort of do, and I think these days things like Teams and other sort of social media type sort of platforms can, if they're done well, they can help with that. So they can really sort of overcome those barriers that might otherwise exist. It's a really tricky thing to get right. I think making decisions in scaled environments. You've got 100 ways to mess it up and maybe 2 or 3 ways to do it right, and it's a case of trying to hit that sweet spot.
And it's also understanding that not everybody is for something or against something. A lot of people say, okay, it's maybe not my preferred choice, but I'm okay with it, so I'm not going to block it. So just go ahead, whatever you choose. I'm not against it, so I won't vote for it, but I won't also vote against it. So I'm neutral, and then that's okay. So also understand that not everybody needs to have an opinion, which is fine. So just get the people who have an opinion and hear them out, and then come to some kind of consensus.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Well, shall we see if there are any questions about the 12 principles? So we've got the 12 principles here. We could also talk about the manifesto values. Jess, how are we getting on? Do we have anything in the Q&A?
Yeah, we've got a couple coming in. So why would business people need to work with developers on a daily basis? Is that distracting and time consuming for the business people?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think, again, that's something that is, I wasn't in the room in 2001, but I imagine that comes from the XP guys, the extreme programming sort of people, where their particular way of doing Agile was quite individual customer focused. They were going to sort of say, well, we've got a customer here, we're going to build stuff for them. In that particular case, in that particular situation, it made sense to have rapid access to the customer. If they were doing sort of quite novel things where the requirements were unclear, in that particular context, it was the right thing to do. And sometimes today that still might be true if you're doing that sort of thing. But I can imagine many cases where that would either be impossible because there's 20 million customers, or very difficult or unfeasible because the customers are working for a client organization that's difficult to get access to, and actually the requirements are relatively clear and understandable. So I think that's maybe a niche that isn't necessarily ubiquitous these days. What do you think, Jurriaan?
Yeah, correct. You see that also that's a kind of the sweet spot that Scrum was trying to find by introducing a role like the product owner. So you do want to have your customer close or a good representative of the customer, but you don't want him to be able to distract the team all the time. So you make some agreements, some rules saying, okay, yes, we get customer input and you are available during the sprint, but it doesn't mean you can change direction during our sprint all the time, because we do need a little bit of focus. We do need some thinking time, some time to work something out, even if we find out that it's not completely correct. But don't distract me the whole time with new ideas and trying to nitpicky on every little detail. So that is where there's a balance to be found.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. So the Scrum Master role essentially is then able to adapt to a particular situation. If there is that need for close customer focus, they can do it. Or if they're in a different scenario, it's on them, really, isn't it, to figure out the best way of making sure that the customer will be happy, and they can sort of choose the most appropriate way to do that for their context.
Yeah, I've seen many different ways of doing that. Some teams, they say, okay, we open we have an open hour every day where you can come in and ask your question and leave us alone for the rest of the day. Or teams say, we don't mind so much if you walk in, but don't stay too long, or we'll just park questions if we cannot answer them within a minute or something. It's a way that teams need to figure out what works best for them, and it's also very dependent on the people. Some people can handle distractions, some people cannot handle it so much. So find a way that works with your team, But yes, and that is what is said here in this principle. It is very good to have a customer or a good representative close by, because the whole thing why we do Agile is because there is no single true solution. We have to experiment our way forward to find the best solution currently possible, giving some guardrails like technology or available time and money. And that is why you need to figure things out and do some experiments. So you make something, you show it, you get feedback, and you move on.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the most important thing. Where if you look at traditional waterfall, we thought we knew everything at the beginning, and then you build exactly it, and a year later you build exactly what was spec'd. But hey, everything has changed. What we thought was good then is not good anymore. So, and that's of course something that's why we have this principle that takes takes the customer live within the team or very close to the team on a very short-term basis. And that is, well, if you look at Kneffin is also there, where you see this third quadrant in the upper left. That is where you try to do experiments. You try to come to a best solution given your time, and that is related to this principle, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It always helps to sort of know the nature of the work that you're doing and matching that to the sort of the response. Yeah. So, what's the third quarter? Is that complex at the top there? Is it?
I'm always confused by complicated and complex.
Yes, you've got to get it the right way around. I think complicated is where more is known than is unknown, and it lends itself better for things like project style delivery, because you can pretty much sort of work things out. Whereas complex is where you've tipped over that balance, haven't you? More is uncertain, more is unknown than is known, and it makes. Yeah, I guess that's where Scrum is optimized for. Scrum, sort of seeks to operate in the sort of complex domain, and that sort of justifies the overhead of stopping every 2 weeks to say, right, how about now? We've done a little bit. Let's just check, and now we can do a bit more. Whereas if you're merely complicated, it's less uncertain, so it lends itself better for, I guess, more of a plan-based approach.
Yeah. It's like in the complex quadrant, you are basically feedback-based progress, and on the complicated one, it is complicated. So you need to think a little bit ahead. Okay, what way would probably work best? But once you chose a direction, it's quite clear how you get there.
Yeah. Good. Let's move on before we bore our attendees with complex Kneffin sort of theory. Jess, do we have any more questions in the Q&A?
Yeah. So, wouldn't changing requirements late in a process be inefficient?
Maybe so. Yeah. So this is principle 2. Yeah. Welcome changing requirements even late in development. Yeah. What do you think, Jurriaan?
I think the answer is in the principle. It's if you respond to a change late in a project, it's probably because there is a good reason for that change. So if we don't do it, will we ever be successful? It's about getting to the customer's competitive advantage to be able to implement this change, maybe at the cost of something else, but that's
So I guess that's the key to it, so welcome changing requirements if it is indeed to the customer's competitive advantage. And I think that should be a question.
Yeah.
I guess maybe the sort of question behind the question is, if you're changing the plan every 2 minutes or, every couple of days, then yes, I think you can spin around in circles and get nowhere. But whenever change comes in, whenever there's an option to change, that should be the question. Would changing now produce better value or be a competitive advantage? If not, then let's carry on, because it could sometimes be distracting.
Yeah, and the question that was also about whether it being efficient or not. It is the agile way of working that makes change more efficient. So you are ready for handling change. So change is not super expensive. Of course, there's always a cost, but compared to your traditional waterfall, where change is super expensive because you basically need to stop and start over. Here we say, okay, yes, there is some disadvantage probably because we have to redo some stuff or make a little adjustment, but we made it as cheap as possible at this time. So that's why this all says welcome change. Don't be afraid of it. Say, yeah, let the change come. We are in some way we are ready for it.
Yeah, great. Good. Okay. Anything else, Jess? Any more questions in the Q&A?
That's it for the moment.
Good, right. So last topic then, before the final random questions. I would say do feel free to pile in with the questions. We do have plenty of time. We're sort of talking fairly sort of at length about the questions so far. There's not too many questions that have come in, but by all means, if you're having questions, maybe don't even sort of restrict it to the topic. If there's something you've heard about here that you'd like to hear more about, more than happy to adapt and sort of tackle whatever it is that you'd like to hear. But onto the final topic then. So what role do tools play in maintaining effective practices such as planning and reviews? So I've got a picture here about what tools used to look like. So this is a few of our clients over the years, and this is how we used to plan and convey information and sort of do meetings and run sessions, all very tactile, all very sort of physical, sort of flip charts, white, sort of post-it notes, sort of things on walls, getting together in rooms. These days it looks a bit more like this. Things have gone remote. We're using electronic tools and different sort of solutions, different sort of ways of conveying information. And I guess the role of tools has therefore changed quite significantly over the last year. But I guess the objective remains the same. We need to be able to plan our work. We need to be able to know where we're going. We have plans, we need to get work done, we need to coordinate it, we need to sort of evaluate work that's been done. So I guess the sort of key question is, what's the best set of tools and what role should tools play in the process? Are there any sort of good patterns that you've seen over this recent crisis, Jurriaan? Any sort of good sort of case studies or uses of tools that you've seen being effective?
Yeah. What you see, that the best tools that people like working the most are the tools that are interactive, and they're very, very visual. So if you have a tool that shows like a Kanban board or those kind of boards, but you need to refresh the page for it to update, it will work, but not so good, because if you don't remember it, or if it does it every 5 minutes by itself, it's not convenient. So maybe your tool doesn't support seeing it actually being dragged along, but at least if you see it switch over and maybe highlight or something, so a change has happened, that will work. And nowadays with modern technologies, that should be no problem to have live or almost live tools that mimic the actual physical world tool that it's trying to mimic as closely as possible.
Yeah, interesting.
You can't go too far if you have all these 3D effects or whatever. They probably don't add a lot of extras. So seeing it actually being dragged along the screen, I'm not sure if that adds up. But having in a live update with different colors and easy to drag and drop or something, that will help.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I think one of the things that I've noticed as being important is just simplicity. There's been a huge proliferation of whiteboards and tools and a whole bunch of stuff, and all the video conferencing firms have all been sort of going crazy to compete with each other. And obviously, this last year has been a mass experiment in remote working for many, and a whole load of good stuff has come out of it. But where I've seen things go wrong is where it's been overcomplicated. We in particular, we run lots of online training courses where you're getting a new set of sort of 5, 10, 15, 20 people for a 2-day course. And we very quickly realized that we have to make the tool absolutely as simple as it possibly can be. If it's too clever for its own good, if it's, as you say, if there are sort of clever effects or clever sort of gimmicks that look nice, or even would be useful if you'd have used it for a couple of weeks and got used to it, it's hopeless. There's going to be, in a class of 15 or 20, there's going to be 1 or 2 people that just say, well, it's not working, I don't know how to do it, I'm clicking on the thing, it's not the right thing. And that creates a barrier. So the absolute simplest tools, I think, are the most effective, things that are easy to get into and easy to work with. And that you don't,
I would emphasize that it should be simple for the user, and maybe for the people who set up the tool, who make your views or boards or whatever you want to call it. For them, it can be a little bit more. They are trained. They can have a lot of features available to them, but all that should be hidden as much as possible for the actual user. Because for the user, it should be crystal clear, and you have all the cool features available to you, but they're prepared for you. So you can.
That's a good point. Yeah, I've spent hours making it a 30-second job for a sort of delegate to be able to move a thing easily and to sort of set up an exercise in such a way that it's intuitive and easy and quick to do. It's taken it takes a bit of attention to detail, I think, doesn't it?
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's good if you have tools that can provide that, because if it's simple both for the user and both for the, let's call it, the administrator, then maybe it's too limiting. But it all depends on what job you want to get done. There are different tools for different jobs. You see here on this picture, you have tools for like structured work, where you have some board where you need to drag stickies across. That's kind of structured, because maybe you have lanes or columns that you maybe already have named. And other ways, you just would wish you had a blank piece of digital paper where you could just start brainstorming and drawing. And the good thing is nowadays we have tools for both. We even have tools that combine those more or less in one tool. So there's tools for structured work. Think about the Jurriaans and the Targetprocesses of these worlds, and think about tools for unstructured world brainstorming, digital whiteboards like Mira or Mural, or maybe even just the Google Doc that you can collaborate on together because you see each other typing. Maybe that's already good enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the trick is then to sort of match the right tool to the right situation. So if you're sort of if you're in your sort of week by week sprint planning session, probably it makes more sense to use a structured tool. Whereas if you're brainstorming new ideas or doing some sort of one-off workshop or even a training exercise, then sort of using an unstructured tool that perhaps has been set up by a facilitator to work in a certain way is a bit more flexible, and it can sort of produce sort of more interesting outcomes and conversations.
Yeah, true. While working at Targetprocess, we were facing that COVID came and everything needed to be remote, where before not everything needed to be remote. And then for example, if you look at something like how do you facilitate a retrospective meeting, we tried to come up with a solution doing a retrospective in a kind of structured tool like Targetprocess, and we found a way, but it's kind of limiting. I mean, if you want to do something like the sailboat or race car retrospective thing, you just take a digital whiteboard, find a nice picture of a sailboat on the internet, and do some unstructured sticky work. That works way better than trying to fit it into some strict columns or something. So choose your tools wisely and don't try to put everything in one tool.
That's a good point. Yeah, so there's a few options available. You don't have to do everything in one particular choice. Yeah, good. Shall we see if there's any questions coming up in the Q&A? Jess, do we have anything in there?
We have a couple similar questions, stuff to do with emails and surfing the internet whilst they're in meetings. So I guess, how can you stop people from checking emails or going on the internet if they're doing sprint plannings or retrospectives?
Yes, this is a common pattern that's emerged over the last year. Everybody's going online. Even if you can see each other through a webcam, you can't see the hands, and you can't see what you're looking at. And there's been countless occasions where people have, somebody's said, "What do you think about this, Bob?" And Bob looks up, alerts, and I was looking at something else. Can you say that again?
Yeah.
It's a challenge, isn't it? It's a tough one. How can you prevent or restrict people from effectively looking out the window and looking at emails and doing other things, being distracted? I
wouldn't say it really changes a lot if you use it in real life or using digital tools. Of course, with digital tools it's a bit easier because you can look down and look on the second screen or something, but still the solution is not found in tooling or better cameras or, I don't know, tying somebody's hands. It's about keeping whatever is there interesting and keeping it focused and short. That's the solution if you are having a daily stand-up in a Scrum team in a rule with real people, or if you have it online using a Zoom meeting or Teams or whatever. It's keeping it short and keeping it focused. So that's
absolutely
that's the thing to tackle, and not the environment. Because if you're in a real room, you probably wouldn't black out the windows. You just say, "Hey, look here," or is the topic not interesting? Should we change the format instead of blacking out the windows?
Yeah. Because I think this always went on. I think it's when you go distributed, it just amplifies the effect. I remember several sprint planning sessions, especially that maybe had gone on for 2 or 3 hours too long. And you just sort of notice people under the table looking at their phone or sort of starting to sort of do that sort of stuff. I guess now it's just making that easier. It's less obvious that you're sort of looking at other things. And I think you're absolutely right. The thing to do is to make the events better, make it more interesting. In a retrospective, talk about how sprint planning sessions are going and say, well, what's the good stuff? What's the interesting stuff that is relevant? And what's the less relevant stuff? Do we really have to run through the spreadsheets in order every single time, ticking off every single thing and having everybody dutifully reporting this or saying that? Maybe we don't. Maybe we could review it beforehand, and then we're going to sort of come in and just get to the discussion points and get to the interesting stuff. So whatever the meeting is, I think you're absolutely right. Make it interesting. And the way you do that is to talk about it. Let's talk about how we're doing this meeting or that. So let's make sure that it's relevant.
Absolutely correct.
Good. Anything else in the Q&A, Jess?
Yeah, we have another question. What role would digital tools like Mural and Miro play in the new ways of working?
Interesting. I guess this is a little bit like what you were saying earlier about choosing the right tool for the job. I think you gave a good example there, didn't you? Sort of talking about retrospectives. That they often work better in free-form sort of tools. So Mural and Miro, for those that might not have come across them, I can't imagine there's that many people left in the world that haven't, but they're more of the sort of infinite whiteboard type technologies that don't have specific columns for things. It's more of a sort of a bit like sticky notes on a board type thing with a few extra features here and there. There is huge possibility there to design retrospectives, as you hear. You just drag in an image of a sailboat and you can sort of pepper post-it notes around in those sorts of things. Actually, there's an image here, the bottom middle image here on the screen. That is a Mural exercise for story mapping, so generating a product backlog. And that might be appropriate, for example, in a product kickoff workshop. If you've got a new product, or maybe you're planning the work for the next quarter, or some new initiative, an epic that you want to break down, it works quite well to sort of do that bit in something like Mural or Miro. And then maybe once you've sorted through it, to sort of link it into something like Jurriaan or Targetprocess. But once you've sort of sifted it through and had that sort of interactive workshop type session.
Yes. Yeah, you see that with these tools, the quality is not so much in the feature set of those tools. It doesn't matter if you have 10 colors or 50 colors available for your stickies. What matters is how does it feel? Is it fast enough? If you work on this Mural or Miro board with 20 people at the same time, does it feel you're doing it at the same time, or is there a delay? That is way more has way more effect on the quality of the interaction than on the feature set of the tool. Because you probably it's sometimes it's even better to be limited in features, because you don't get distracted by all these possibilities.
Yeah, that's true. I guess it also might work well for things like design sessions, either as in terms of sort of front end design or architecture. If you're the sort of thing where in any situation, if you would have got together in a meeting room and got a whiteboard out, that's probably the situation where something like Mural or Miro is going to help. It's going to sort of work well, either as post-its on the wall or even writing. They do have the ability to draw, and as you say, the good thing about that is 20 people can be looking at the same screen, and the drawing can be as if you're stood in front of that whiteboard, and different people can add to it. I think a bit of experimentation here sometimes helps, in terms of tools in general, whether it's, Miro or Targetprocess or Jira or Slack or Teams, whatever it is. There'll be some teams where that tool will feel better, and there'll be other teams where that tool will feel better. And it goes for the class of tool as well. I worked with a team a few years ago who just spent their entire lives in a chat room. Back then it was IRC, so that maybe dates the anecdote a little bit. They were sat co-located, literally in a four, but they would chat to each other all day in chat. Other teams, even when they're distributed, they just don't like chat. They find it distracting. They sort of say, well, I don't really like having Slack open all the time because it keeps popping up just as I'm getting to something. So for them, something else, maybe email, maybe some other format. So it really depends on what you like and what you respond to, and what an individual group of people prefers to use.
Yes, and nowadays you see that more and more of these tools get integrated, so you can easily switch from one tool or one type of interaction to another type. If you're working in something like Mural and you say, okay, we've got our brainstorm done, and this is the final set of cards, then with a click of the button, you can upload them into your more structured tool. Or if you're chatting in Slack, and this happens to me every day, starting a little chat in Slack. If it's more than a couple of lines, I'll just type in Zoom and I want to have a real life conversation because I'm tired of typing my thoughts into using the keyboard, while just a quick face-to-face audio or video conversation is way faster. So the quality is in the real timeness of tools, but also the easiness of interacting between them.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Anything else in the chat, Sir Jess?
Some people are asking advice on best agile tools for distributed teams.
Best agile tools to distributed teams. I guess we kind of covered that a little bit already. I guess we sort of run through the main options. There's the tool you need for interaction. Things like Slack and Teams can be good for that. There's the thing you need for unstructured work. Miro and Mural are good options. And then there's the structured tools. I think everybody, unless you're literally just one or two people, just getting through stuff, you need some sort of ticketing system, I would say. If you're small, maybe you could start with Trello. That's the simplest one. As you sort of evolve, maybe you grow into things like Targetprocess or Jurriaan or MS as your DevOps. There's a whole bunch of sort of things. So I think, there is no shortage of tools these days, especially at this stage after all these, everyone around the world has been producing, better things and better solutions. But it's just a case of experimenting a little bit, trying to find the particular set that solves your own problem.
Yeah, look at tools that are closely matching with whatever technology. If you're doing IT, if you're in a Microsoft house, then maybe Azure DevOps is very close to your way of working. So that could be a way to look at tools. But also, I would say look at how easy they are to use, how interactive are they. If a tool feels more like a web page than an app, then I'm not sure if it will help you a lot, because you need to remember to refresh, and that's something you don't remember, because in real life you never have to refresh. So yeah, that's, I would look at the ease of use and how well the tool is helping you seeing whatever you need to see by providing this transparency, notifying you of some important event happening, or somebody changed something on something that you're interested in. Do you get a notification? Does it bring up a pop-up, or can you turn that off because it's distracting? Look at those things, because if you look at the basic feature set of most of these tools, they're quite similar. You can build a board in Trello, you can build it in Jira, you can build in Targetprocess. They are on basic level, on features, they are similar, but they feel way different. And that is, I think, important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm a bit biased, so I won't go not too much into detail, but I think that
Yes.
looking at the quality of the interaction is more important than feature set.
Great. Good. Okay. Anything else in the Q&A, Jess?
Nope, that's everything, unless there are a couple last minute questions.
Good. Okay. So last opportunity then for anybody that's on the call, if you want to have a question, now is the time. In the meantime, let me just if you have a final question, we will get to it. But just if not, and just to sort of wrap up a little bit. So first of all, thank you very much for your attention so far over the call today. We would love to get a bit of feedback from you. I think the feedback is going to come by email. Is that right, Jess?
Yes, I'll send it by email.
Great. So in a few moments, you'll receive an email with a link to some feedback. We'd love to know what you thought of this session. And I don't see any more questions in the chat, Jess. Are there any more?
Nope, no more.
Great. Well, all that remains for me to say then is thank you very much for joining me, Jurriaan. It's been really interesting to sort of talk all this through. And thank you to all of our attendees and to Jess as well for looking after us today. And best of luck putting all this into practice, and hope you enjoyed it.
Sure.